Palestine, touchy subject. The Russian Cauldron, 1875 to 1891. The Jews are constantly being persecuted. Let's see what happens in 1875 through 1891 in Russia. Emancipation brought to European Jewry, for the first time in more than 1,000 years, the myriad opportunities of equal rights and full citizenship, made the Jew feel less of an alien, encouraging his participation and even his assimilation into the societies of the West. Many Jewish families abandoned the Jewish identity entirely and, by intermarriage, brought their Jewish heritage to an end. No such temptation presented itself to the vast mass of Russian Jewry. For them, each decade of the 19th century brought further hardship, conjuring up the image of past troubles rather than the hope of any future easement. With the defeat of Napoleon in 1815, more than 5 million Jews had found themselves within the newly enlarged frontiers of Tsarist Russia, and their numbers grew rapidly. Yet, year by year, their legal and economic situation had worsened. In 1845, Tsar Nicholas conceived the idea of dividing the Jews into two categories, the useful and the non-useful. In the useful category were to be wealthy merchants, craftsmen, and farmers whose rights would be respected. The non-useful would include the small tradesmen, the poor, the peddlers, and the unemployed on whom military service would be imposed. In March 1881, Tsar Alexander II was assassinated by socialist revolutionaries who called on the people of Russia to overthrow the Tsarist regime. The government struggled to maintain law and order. Quickly, the Jews were singled out as the scapegoat, and by the end of 1881, more than 200 Jewish communities had suffered. In the wake of these persecutions, small groups of Russian Jews gathered together to discuss what was to be done. Some argued in favor of emigration to the United States of America. Others argued in favor of Jewish settlement in Palestine. This latter possibility was also much discussed by the 250,000 Jews in Romania, whose persecution had continued. It was finally decided by the representatives of 32 local Romanian groups that as a first step, 100 families should leave for Palestine in the following year. Thus was born the first positive action of what was to become a great movement of Jews from both Romania and Russia to Palestine. Went the wrong direction here. I'm just trying to make the text a little bit bigger. By the end of 1882, lovers of Zion groups had sprung all over southern Russia and Romania, determined to join or to support further groups of would-be settlers in the land of Israel. In 1882, Leon Pinsker wrote his book, Emancipation, in which he argued that anti-Semitism was inevitable wherever the Jews were a minority, that they could only be a majority if they had a homeland of their own. The impact of Pinsker's book was immediate. The Russian-born writer and journalist Nahum Sokolov put forward specific proposals for industrial development in Palestine. A British Jew, Zerah Barnett, helped found the May Sherim quarter outside of the walls of Jerusalem and the Jewish village of Petah Tikva. The Katowice Conference allocated money for two projects already existing in Palestine. Baron Edmund de Rothschild had been drawn actively into the tasks of giving financial help to all the struggling settlements in Palestine. By 1890, the number of Russian-born Jews who had settled in Palestine reached 50,000. In Jerusalem alone, the Jews numbered more than 25,000, out of a total population in the city of only 40,000. The Arabs, a majority in the sparsely populated countryside, watched with alarm this influx of newcomers from Russia, and on 24 June 1891, the leading Muslims of Jerusalem telegraphed to the Turkish authorities in Constantinople, praying that the entry of such Jews should be prohibited, as not only was the labor market overstocked, but also the Muslims themselves would be greatly the sufferers, as the European Jews being skilled in all different kinds of trades, the Muslims could not compete against them. As a result of this protest, all Jewish immigration was forbidden by the Turks in July 1891, but After a short while, the ban was not enforced. So a great and beautiful cause. Between 1881 and 1914, more than 2 million Russian Jews left Russia in search of a secure home and unmolested daily life and the chance of education and self-advancement. More than 500,000 of these refugees went to Britain, France, and Western Europe. 80,000 went to Palestine, but the vast mass, more than 2 million, crossed the Atlantic to the Argentine, to Canada, and to what they called in Yiddish the Golden Medina, the Golden Realm, the United States. In Western Europe, there was an equally remarkable flowering of the Jewish genius in the years before the First World War, when Jewish self-help, Jewish community organizations, and Jewish participation in national, political, cultural, and scientific life reached new dimensions of activity and success. In Russia, on the other hand, there were official programs and secret groups of individuals dedicated to limiting Jewish success, even fostering anti-Semitism in spite of increasing emigration. These efforts broke out in violence and death for many Jews in 1905. Hence, the conclusion of Zionists was constantly reinforced throughout the world. Jews needed a homeland they could call their own. Jerusalem must be the only ultimate goal, 1906 to 1914. During 1906, there were yet more pogroms in Russia for the fifth consecutive year. In the same 10 years, more than 1 million Jews reached the United States from Russia alone. Yet, despite the continuing appeal of the United States, the material, more difficult choice, Palestine, was still excited those for whom it was not simply a question of somewhere to go, but of a return to the historic home of the Jewish people. In Jerusalem, the Jewish population had reached 40,000 by 1905 and constituted more than two-thirds of the city's total population. In February 1908, the 18-year-old Adolf Hitler arrived in Vienna from provincial Austria. For 5 years, Hitler observed the Jews of the city with a growing hatred, which he was later to describe in his book Mein Kampf. Hitler's hatred soon turned towards the 175,000 Jews of Vienna. While Hitler was nurturing his anti-Semitic fantasies in Vienna, the Jews themselves were continuing to seek in Palestine a new life and new opportunities denied them in so many other lands. Zionism in the first 2 years of war, 1914-1916. With the outbreak of war in Europe in August 1914, the 5 million Jews of Tsarist Russia found themselves allied to the more liberal governments of Britain and France. There was another Russian-born Jew, the electrical engineer Pinchas Rutenberg, who, early in September 1914, believing that Britain would be victorious, was convinced that if a Jewish force could be raised to fight with the Allied armies, there would be a better chance of the Jews being given a choice at the post-war peace conference and might lead to the restoration of a Jewish state in Palestine. The British conquest of Turkey was an opportunity for the partition of the Ottoman Empire, in which was pressed for some form of British protectorate over Palestine in the interest of future Jewish settlement. So we have the evolution of the Balfour Declaration, 1917. The anguish of the Jews when confronted by Christian or Muslim persecution, their own efforts to rebuild and revitalize Jewish life in Palestine, and their realization that a British victory over the Turks could lead to a British-sponsored Jewish Commonwealth in Palestine produced during 1917 the conditions needed to advance the Zionist cause. For Jews all over the world, the prospect of British troops entering Jerusalem brought with it the chance of the first Jewish self-government since before Roman times. On March 21st, the War Cabinet of Britain discussed the coming British military advance into Palestine. Both Prime Minister Lloyd George and Lord Balfour raised, sympathetically, the question of Zionist aims. It was now widely known that one result of a British victory over the Turks in Palestine would be the furthering of the Zionist policies, while Jews and Zionists in both Russia and Britain were helping the Allied cause. In Palestine itself, the Jewish population was increasingly the victim of Turkish persecution. The Russian Revolution of March 1917, with its call for liberty, far from weakening Jewish nationalism, did but deepen and intensify the national aspirations. The official War Cabinet minutes recorded Balfour's words as follows. The Secretary of State for Foreign Affairs stated that he gathered that everyone was now agreed that, from a purely diplomatic and political point of view, it was desirable that some declaration favorable to the aspirations of the Jewish nationalists should now be made. The vast majority of Jews in Russia and America, as indeed all over the world, now appeared to be favorable to Zionism. If we could make a declaration favorable to such an ideal, we should be able to carry on extremely useful propaganda both in Russia and America. He gathered that the main arguments still put forward against Zionism were twofold: that Palestine was inadequate to form a home for either the Jewish or any other people, and that the difficulty felt with regard to the future proposition of Jews in Western countries. So Balfour's exposition continued. With regard to the first, he understood that there were considerable differences of opinion among experts regarding the possibility of the settlement of any large population in Palestine. But he was informed that if Palestine were scientifically developed, a very much larger population could be sustained than had existed during the period of Turkish misrule. So as to the meaning of the words national home, to which the Zionists attached so much importance, he understood it to mean some form of British, American, or other protectorate under which full facilities would be given to the Jews to work out their own salvation and to build up, by means of education, agriculture, and industry, a real center of national culture and focus on national life. It did not necessarily involve the early establishment of an independent Jewish state, which was a matter for gradual development in accordance with the ordinary laws of political evolution and condition. The War Cabinet's acceptance of what was to become known as the Balfour Declaration made it clear that two pressing and potentially conflicting interests were now in harmony: the long-term needs and aspirations of Zionism and the immediate harsh dictates of war. So, hopes and promises. The Balfour Declaration achieved one of the main aims of the Zionists. The return of the Jews to Palestine had been recognized as a legitimate aspiration for world Jewry. But one imponderable condition remained. The Balfour Declaration, although approved by the United States, France, and Italy, had been granted by Britain alone, and it would depend on Britain as how it would be implemented. The Jews did not become masters of their own destiny in Palestine on 2nd November 1917. That destiny still depended upon British rules and interpretations. It needed also further immigration, land purchase, investment, agricultural and industrial development, dedication, fair dealing, and the continual thrust of faith in the Jewish future and idealism. Britain's military conquest of Palestine was no longer in doubt. Following the conquest of Beersheba on the evening of October 31st, the Turks sought in vain to hold Gaza or to protect the approaches to Jerusalem. Gaza fell to the British on November 6th, and the British troops pressing forwards towards Jerusalem liberated both Arab and villages in their daily advances. Yet on November 6th, the day of the fall of Gaza, all Lord Hardinge's hopes for the skillful management of the Jews of Russia were dashed by events in Russia itself. That evening, the Bolshevik leader Vladimir Ilyich Lenin, entered the capital, and within 48 hours the provisional government had been overthrown. By nightfall on November 8th, the new Bolshevik regime had destroyed the Russian war effort by declaring an immediate end to the war. At the same time, by handing over the estates to the peasants, they ensured that hundreds of thousands of peasants would at least leave the army units for their promised farms, thus effectively demobilizing what was left of the Russian fighting forces. Lenin's anti-war declarations destroyed the immediate aim of the Balfour Declaration in Russia. In the confusion of war, news of the Balfour Declaration did not reach Petrograd until November 29th. So the British support for a national home for the Jewish people in Palestine depended in the first instance upon driving the Turks out of Palestine. A further major step forward towards this took place on December 9th when General Allenby's forces received the surrender of Jerusalem. Scarcely 2 months after the Balfour Doctrine was issued, the question began to be discussed in London as to how the existing Arab majority in Palestine could be reconciled to any special privileges that might be given to the Jews. While the Balfour Declaration envisaged at least the possibility of an eventual Jewish majority, it was clear that it would be many years before such a majority would exist. Arab unease arose largely due to misunderstanding of Zionist aims and intentions. For example, the Arab belief that Zionism involved the expropriation of Arab proprietors and the handing over to future Jewish tutelage of Christian and Muslim sites. Both these objections, it was pointed out, had been clearly and emphatically disavowed by the responsible leaders of